Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam here on DZRJ Radio and RJ TV, channel 224 on Sky Cable. My name is Eric Lecain. So happy you could join us this week. Please check us out live on the RJ Facebook page, also on YouTube and TikTok. We bring you what I think are the most interesting stories of the week, things going on around the world. This week on the show, Asian hate crimes, also big storms, the comeback of fascism. Is Russia redrawing the world map? Some money news, and the big-time cheating scandal in the world of chess. Oh, we got a tall mountain of stories this week, all right here on the World News Jam on RJTV. So strap on your old scrappy parachute and let's jump. Now, there's a street in San Francisco that was named the other day, Vika Rantanapakdi Street. Okay, that doesn't exactly roll off the tongue like maybe First Street does, but that's the name of the new street. Now, obviously, that's a guy who got the street named after him, and obviously, that's a Thai name that you can tell by the difficulty that I'm having to pronounce it. So why is a Thai guy with a name with 4 A's in it getting a street named after him in San Francisco? Well, just a little background first. He was a math teacher in Thailand, worked at the bank. He was also well known in his place because of his very good English. Now, if you have ever been to Thailand, you know how hard it can be to understand most people's English there. He loved the idea of the United States, loved to talk about it a lot. Eventually, he was able to become an immigrant, went there to take care of his grandchildren. But one fateful morning, during his usual walk, all that changed. While walking down the street, a young man just ran up to him and knocked him over. What was the reason? Well, no real reason, only that he was Asian. The guy didn't like Asians. Well, Mr. Rantanapakdi, who was 84 years old at the time and a grandpa, he fell to the ground, his head slamming on the pavement. He went unconscious, and even though he was rushed to the hospital, they could not revive him. He was dead. Why did he die? The only reason given was because he was Asian. Since the pandemic in America, hate crimes against Asians are on the rise. I mean, before there were anti-Asian crimes, but since the pandemic, they were up 148% in 2020 and 339% in 2021. Not much of this is, most of this is geared toward Chinese people because of the previous president's constant blame of the pandemic on the Chinese. But in the U.S., I have to say, Asians, to us, well, they all look alike. You look at a Filipino or a Thai or a Korean, they're all Chinese to the average American. I remember when I first came to the Philippines, I couldn't tell Asians apart, but now I find it rather simple. And also, some Americans just don't like Asians in general, or blacks, or Hispanics, or Jews, or gays. But the difference is the hate crimes against Asia is becoming the normal. Crimes against Asians are leading in the U.S. as far as the biggest increase of any crime against any minority group. San Francisco alone went from 9 to 60 crimes in 1 year. This is part of the reason that right now Asians are thinking twice about going to the richest, most wonderful country in the world. It was the place to go. Well, maybe that was what many Asians used to think about America. In a survey in China, they found that 23% of Chinese are not that interested to go to the U.S. anymore, and 22% are not interested in going to the U.S. at all. The reason? Violent crime. 44% are worried about being attacked just because they're Asian. Now, of course, an obvious reason is the fact that the U.S. has a very bad gun control problem, and there are so many mass shootings there. But many Asians also believe that the U.S. police, the customs officials at the airport and any other government officials don't like them. Now, many of these crimes against Asians you will never hear about because they just aren't that interesting to Americans. In fact, it wasn't until the Georgia spa murders, in which 8 Asian women were shot and killed just because they were Asian, that made people sit up and notice this trending problem in the U.S. Last year, a New York Congresswoman, Grace Ming, who is of Taiwanese descent, introduced the COVID-19 hate crimes bill to try and make this a specific crime with a punishment if it's proven that the crime is done to an Asian just because they are Asian. Of course, it doesn't help that it's perceived in China that it's the U.S. that is leading the global bias against Chinese. We really have Donald Trump to thank for that, as he continually called the COVID virus the China virus and blamed the whole worldwide pandemic on China. Right now, China is considered the U.S.'s biggest rival, and many Americans believe that they can't be trusted and that they want to hurt the U.S. When you see the same rhetoric every day, you start to blame them for everything bad in the world. And this hate for the Chinese is, of course, played up on Chinese TV. Although there, the government sort of controls much of what people can see on mass media, but many countries are warning their citizens that any trip to the U.S. could result in violence. It wasn't that long ago where I reported on a man that ran up behind an Asian man on the street in New York and stabbed him in the back with a knife. The two men had never met before, had never spoken. The violent attack was based entirely on the fact that the man was an Asian. In 2020, on the New York subway, a man assaulted a Chinese woman, calling her diseased. He kicked and punched the woman because she was from a country that he thought brought the virus to the world. In Los Angeles, a man screamed at an Asian woman, saying that Asians are the natural carriers of the disease because they are disgusting people. In schools, Asian kids are being bullied by other students. In Los Angeles, there was a young Chinese boy accused of having COVID, so his schoolmates beat him so bad that he had to be admitted to the hospital. In another incident, a teacher sent an Asian boy to the nurse's office after he just coughed a little bit from drinking some water. When the kid returned, other students ridiculed him for having COVID, even though he didn't have COVID. People don't think, it's any harm to call it the China virus or the Kung flu. That immediately stereotypes Asians as being the carrier of the disease, and that creates fear. And as well as we all know, fear leads to hate, and hate leads to violence. There are things we don't understand, cultures we can't discern. We equate Asians as an attack on us, Americans. This kind of thing has gone on for a while, but the difference now is that society notices it, and we recognizes that it's not what should be a part of how we should be. Why do some white people, more directly, why do some Americans hate Asians? The reason is, well, because they are not us. In the new U.S. nationalistic MAGA society, we believe that anyone that is not like us is inferior to us. This is real. This is something that's happening now, something that must be seen in society and must be put under a spotlight before it gets out of control. I would say that it's kind of cool to have a street called Rantana Pakti. But at the same time, I'm kind of ashamed as an American that the street must be named at all. In the end, our DNA is less than 1% different than every other human on Earth. In fact, we hate each other over that 1%. It's really part of us that we really shouldn't have, should we? This is Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. So let's move to something slightly in the same vein. Fascism. Interesting word, isn't it? I remember hearing it a lot in high school history class. class which I don't remember much because of all the sleeping I did or the passing notes to a girl named Julie. But it's a word I've been hearing about a lot lately. I mean, it does keep popping up when they speak out about the ex-president of the U.S. or even the current president of Russia. In a nutshell, it's a system of government led by a dictator who typically rules by force, often violently suppressing any opposition and criticism, controlling all industry and commerce, and promoting nationalism and often racism. I got that definition off of Google, so it's very broad. But it does match a lot of current politicians in the world somewhat, doesn't it? I mean, honestly, it doesn't sound so much like Donald Trump, but it does sound like what Trump wishes he were if he could be. It does, however, sound a lot like Vladimir Putin of Russia, Marie Le Pen of France. Remember her? She came very close to winning the election in France. Kind of describes Kim Jong-un of North Korea, Bolsonaro of Brazil, who may be reelected soon, Erdogan of Turkey, Viktor Orban of Hungary, who has basically done away with democracy. I mean, there's kind of a lot that seems to fall into the category of fascism. Of course, the best example of fascism really has to be Adolf Hitler, right? The Nazi Party was all about anti-Semitism and scientific racism. They believed that they were the superior race. But the guy who really started it all would, I guess, have to be Mussolini of Italy. He sort of got the whole thing rolling back there in 1925 after World War I. He was basically the opposite of democracy, individualism, socialism. During his time, the police became all powerful and could do about anything they wanted to without being accounted for. There were spies and informers, and their targets were usually poor working class. Mussolini eventually became the ally of Hitler. Go figure. He tried pretty much to kill democracy in Italy. His idea of government was that you worship your leader and that you lived your life for a national unity. And well, if you didn't, or you wanted to speak out against the government, then, well, that would be the end of you. Mussolini made Italy a one-party state. So there was no need for elections. You were a citizen. This was your leader, and you have to live with it. Now, in these modern times, it doesn't really seem like that kind of thing would be very popular for most. However, if you look at the world right now, these conservative, right-wing, racist, nationalistic leaders are winning elections. I mean, we thought that maybe when Mussolini and his mistress were killed fleeing the country, that maybe that was the end of fascism in Italy. It was not until last week. This is when Giorgia Meloni won the presidency in Italy. Hey, it's great that a woman is the president. However, she is, by all accounts, the same party as Mussolini. The group known as the Brothers of Italy, the far right-wing conservatives, overtook the other parties and now represent the largest bloc of voters. Now, she stands for everything you would think most Italians wouldn't. But like in the U.S., there's a lot more right-wing religious conservatives than you would think. And she clearly appeals to those voters. She believes the LGBT community is bringing great harm to women and families because of their so-called gender identity initiative, that minorities such as Muslims are part of the great replacement of white Italians. She has expressed support for Putin. She's also rolling back women's rights, supporting hardcore pro-life stances. In other words, she is connecting with voters that are leaning away from the center of issues and far from the liberal thinking many of us thought was more popular there in Italy. I mean, many of the Italian voters would reject these ideas, but instead they have embraced them. The Meloni party is very anti-immigrant, very somewhat anti-democracy. So why would Italians want to bring that back? Maybe this starts to explain why around the world people are embracing historical moments in their country which were horrible for them. When the country was in ruin economically and socially, when the country finally had to forcibly remove or execute its leader from a country. I mean, during the final years of Mussolini, it's considered the worst time in Italian history. yet they just voted back into power someone with the same family of views. How could the Italians vote in someone who many believe wants to do away with democracy? I mean, look at all the fascist regimes around the world now, and look at how those countries are doing compared to everyone else. I mean, could Italy pull out of the EU under its new leadership? Could Hungary? We can take a look at the U.S. and what it went through with Trump. He created something called America First. The idea being, we don't care what the world thinks we should do. We do what I think we should do. And when neo-Nazis in the U.S. held a rally in Virginia in which a young girl was killed, he said, there are good people on both sides. You know, we talked about all this stuff before, how the world is turning more toward these nationalistic leaders that want to shut down the borders and not be a part of the global economy anymore. It's all showing power and making threats. They are against trying to move away from carbon emissions. Even the temperature of the world is getting worse around them. They want to lock the borders and isolate themselves, even though it's proven that immigration helps economies. They continually use the threat of war as a show of power to back their country, as a way of racial conquest. I mean, Sweden's hardcore right-wing group, which is almost a Nazi-like anti-immigration party, may now have the right to control that country. The election seems to be complete as of today. Their leader says that immigration from Muslim countries is the largest threat to Sweden than anything else right now. So as the new leader of Italy is contemplating creating a border wall of ships to protect Italy from any more immigration, Sweden, who was the king of offering asylum before, who were on the leading edge of being one of the more progressive states of Europe and being one of the fastest growing multicultural countries on the planet, may take a big about face. The new party in Sweden wants to, in essence, remove non-born Swedish people and possibly shut down its borders. As we are starting to see mass shootings on the rise in Sweden, as well as crime, the far-right party there has used this in a way to get people to fear anything that's not them. Rising food and gasoline can be used as a means to say that we need conservative hardline politicians. This is even though its policies of Russia that are causing many of these current high prices there are part of this. I mean, many people have said that they are leaving the U.S. to move to Europe because they are tired of the ultra-religious, conservative, right-wing MAGA movement. However, as of now, you might not be able to escape it even there. The fascist, nationalistic type politicians in Europe have been waiting and waiting, pushing their policies and building a base of supporters over the last few decades. And now it's their time. As we know, Marine Le Pen has been inching closer and closer to winning an election in France. The UK has cut financial ties with the EU. Sweden is about to allow a Nazi-type government to be in charge. Hungary is ending democracy. Russia is annexing a country, and Italy is bringing back the party of Mussolini. Over the past century, the world has made somewhat smaller steps to create a peaceful, loving place where everyone has a chance to prosper and not live in poverty and sickness. The problem is that many people don't seem to like that kind of world. They want to go back to a time where leaders controlled us, a time of corruption and violence. It's funny, sometimes the things that we want others to see us being are just not what we are at all. And this is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. Thank you for tuning in. We're talking about interesting stories going on around the world. You know, in the Philippines, we had a bit of a storm last week. Or was it this week? Or was it the week before? There's so many storms in the Philippines lately. They're always tracking another one. I remember karting the other week. That was the pretty furious one, reaching speeds of 170 kph. Several people died because of that one. 52,000 had to be evacuated. And there's more storms in the waters trying to decide if they're going to work their way to the Philippines. But one thing I can say about the Philippines, and this comes from experience, they know how to get through a typhoon. Everyone has experience here with typhoons. And they already know what's going to happen because they've been through it before. But not so much with the rest of the world. Of course, last week we were talking about a Hurricane Fiona and Canada getting hit by that storm. That's something you don't hear every day. Puerto Rico and Bermuda got hit pretty bad. But the main hurricane spots in the U.S. kind of got through that one pretty easily. But just when the states of Florida and South Carolina were breathing a sigh of relief, another storm was building up in the Atlantic, Ian. This storm is hardcore. It actually was one of the top 5 most powerful storms ever to hit the United States, with wind speeds reaching 260 kilometers per hour. This is a speed that can lift a car or a boat off the ground and move it hundreds of feet. Ian created massive storm surges, of which they have already recorded some at 25 feet high. Witnesses in Florida said it's something like seeing a dam breaking open. Now, the problem with this storm is that it was a direct hit over very densely populated areas. Tampa, Naples, Clark Gable, Florida, Fort Myers, major metropolitan areas. Many were saying that the storm surge was like nothing that they had ever seen hit that area. When you look at the pictures of the beaches, it looks like a giant kind of walk through, kicking and smashing everything in its path. Looking at the photos, you say to yourself, how on earth did that huge boat get lifted and put way over there? They're saying that Fort Myers beaches will need 80% to be rebuilt. There's parts of the Sanibel Island that are just gone now. Many homes were just turned into sticks. And if you think your house was okay because it was made of concrete, well, you would be wrong. The wind and rain just crumbled concrete walls like it was a gingerbread house. The busy tourist areas are now just wastelands of muddy debris. Several islands now are completely cut off from the mainland. The streets are basically rivers, which adds a whole nother element to this problem. Someone filmed what looks to be a shark swimming around in the middle of the street. And where are all those alligators and snakes going to go in Florida? The real problem is because the streets are now connected to the ponds and the rivers. The government asked people to evacuate, but of course many stayed behind. The death toll is somewhere around 45, with thousands needed to be rescued. Many of the people that live in these areas are retired people. As many as 3,500 people had to be evacuated from nursing homes. There's cars upside down, yachts upside down, completely destroyed. There's one picture of a whole bunch of houses in a row, and all the roofs are peeled off of every house. It's what sometimes is referred to in the weather world as apocalyptic destruction. Now, as it left Florida, it lost much of its intensity. However, going from a Category 4 to a Category 1 still was not much relief for South Carolina, as it slammed into that state with 100-mile-an-hour winds, causing flooding and power outages and damage. Now, we know that storms are coming. They come every year. It's part of the summer season as more moisture is funneled into the atmosphere. But doesn't it seem now that there's more storms than ever before? I mean, maybe, right? According to scientists, there are certain parts of the earth that are much hotter than they are supposed to be. Hurricane Ian did exactly what a hurricane does. It pulls up moisture coming up from the warmer ocean, but it seems like storms are now pulling up more moisture than is naturally supposed to. This is not something that just happened this year. This has been building up for decades. Carbon dioxide has been gathering up to the point where the heat in the ocean cannot dissipate. So it's been building and building over time, over years, and now, boom, bigger, more intensive storm is developing over all this heat and water. Over the past years, the speed and size of these storms has been ticking upward. If you look back historically, you will see that there is a 24% more chance of having an Ian-sized storm in the world than there was 40 years ago. And in the Atlantic, that number moves to 260% increase in the chance of having a big storm. In other words, the chances of there being a 3 category or higher is 3 times of what it was in the 1980s. You start putting all the massive storms in the Atlantic side by side, you start to see how this trend is moving. It's kind of weird how scientists are saying that the umbrella effect of pollution hovering over an area can slow the effect of heating of water. However, now that there has been a push to remove air pollution, that loss of the umbrella combined with the carbon dioxide in the air or the increase in greenhouse gases have made a recipe for bigger, more powerful storms. So in fixing one problem, it just seems like we have created another. In order to fix this problem, we are not only going to need to reduce air pollution, but also greenhouse gases, because there is a possibility on the line that next year, or the following year, or maybe the year after that, there will be a storm that is not survivable. Right now, the wind is bad, but we humans can survive it. But according to scientists, it's possible to have a storm where the wind and the rain and the storm surge is not survivable. When this storm happens, humans will need to begin moving away from the course and farther inland. That the coast will basically become a dead zone for humans. That all of a sudden, the high price of a view of the beach will not be worth your life. And once and for all, I guess we can leave the alligators in peace. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio and RJTV. Satanism. That's a word you don't hear every day. I mean, it's basically worshiping the devil. Sort of comes from the Christian culture because just like in any good movie, to go with the hero, there must be a villain. And the devil, as we know him, is the villain in the story of the Bible. Now, of course, I know in that Netflix show Lucifer, the devil has become a detective that solves crimes and is the hero. But of course, most beliefs is that the devil is the badness that is in all mankind. Now, Satanism has found its way into politics recently. In the U.S., supposedly the Democratic Party is secretly devil-worshipping pedophiles that run Hollywood. So far, there's been no proof of that, although people love to say it. Especially that QAnon group. Basically, anyone that is not in your way of thinking must be controlled by the devil. Which is why it was interesting to hear the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, proclaim that the United States is a product of Satanism. That is what he called the U.S. at this big celebration of Russia's annexation of part of the Ukraine. Recently, Russia decided to announce that the places they currently occupy in the Ukraine are now part of Russia. They had a vote in the different parts of the Ukraine, and people voted that Russia is now their country. Now, granted that the Russian military presided over the voting, and many times they would be the ones voting for you. And by the fact that since so many refused to vote, the Russians allowed children as young as 13 to vote. But suffice to say, they all voted to be part of Russia. Seems a little premature to announce that the parts of the Ukraine are yours, even though the Ukrainian military is slowly taking them back as they inch their way back across the country. But okay. So the big speech made by Putin this week was surrounded by all his best followers, including the new people he has installed to run the new Russian provinces, which no one in the world recognizes are his except him and maybe the people at the speech, maybe. But one interesting thing was how Putin was able to justify himself. He made the point that he is the one to undo the mistakes of the leaders of the Soviet Republic and how they allowed for the great country of Russia to be carved up into small pieces against the will of the Russian people. He said those leaders simply did not understand what they were doing, nor the consequences of their actions. On the subject of using nuclear weapons, he said that the idea of nuclear weapons being used to deal with the problem was brought on by the U.S., who opened up the door to using nuclear weapons when they bombed Japan. And that using them may be the only way to keep his people safe. That he will improve the lives of the people of Ukraine, that he will rebuild the housing and the schools and the hospitals and theaters and museums. Of course, these are all the ones that Russian army has destroyed. He went on to say that the Western sanctions were not enough to hurt them, that they, the West, has moved on to sabotage. This has to do with the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. Russia, of course, is blaming the U.S. for the leaks of the pipeline because, his quote, "He who benefits is the one who did it." However, many are speculating that it might have been Russia that blew the holes in its own pipeline in order to increase its leverage over the European markets. All we know for sure is that mines were placed at two different spots and detonated, and it was done by someone with very high-end technology. Maybe pointed out that Russian submarines were in the vicinity at the time. However, we still have no proof as to who actually did it. He said that the European people, that now they can't heat their apartments, which I guess is true. But still, it's hard to say exactly who benefits the most from blowing up this pipeline, Russia or the U.S. No matter who it is, according to Putin, the U.S. is moving toward Satanism. That in the U.S., they are teaching sexual deviation to children in order for them to change their gender. He claimed that he is fighting for Russia to protect our children and grandchildren from this experiment to change their souls. He said, "I believe the spiritual power of the Russian people, and my spirit is its spirit. The suffering of the people is my suffering." Kind of looks like Putin is referring to himself as the new Messiah, doesn't it? Only he can save you from the imperialism, the colonialism, the hypocrisy, the Satanism that is coming from the West now. So what does this all mean now as far as the war goes? Putin has not only occupied some of the eastern parts of the Ukraine, but has already redrawn the lines on the map of the world, saying, well, because we are standing on this land, it's now ours. But of course, this is illegal under international law. We know this already because China kind of did this same thing in the West Filipino Sea. So I'm not sure what can ever come of this. Putin cannot put back the Soviet Union back the way it was, no matter how hard he tries. And currently, the backlash among the Russian public is continuing to surmount against him. But the question still remains, what if Putin uses a nuclear weapon? Now, people are saying, he will never do that. But then again, he said he would never invade the Ukraine. What if the Ukrainian military were to march beyond the Russian border and put Russia on the defensive? What if they marched into Russia carrying weapons given to them by the U.S. and the West? Would Putin see that as an attack on Russia by the U.S., as he keeps saying? Biden has been very careful to try and avoid this scenario because right now, if Putin were to fire a nuclear weapon at Ukraine, he could very well lose the support of anybody he's gotten, including India and China. And you can bet that if he did launch a nuke, the U.S. would sanction him completely. If others, if anyone on earth deals with Putin, then they would be the enemy of the U.S. And who's going to risk that? Or maybe Biden might fire back with a nuclear weapon of his own. But the U.S. and the EU's military together far outpowers that of Russia. If Putin were to try and tackle that based on the Russian performance in the Ukraine, which is not very impressive, by the way, so far, I believe that the Putin government would fall. The West would move in, take over that country, but not before many, many people would die. Russia claims to have more nuclear weapons than the U.S., but in all honesty, you really don't need that many, do you? Just a few will do the trick. And the U.S. already has plans in place to deal with Russia if indeed they decide to move to the nuclear option. I'm just not sure who would be classified as the follower of Satanism at that point. But can you imagine how the lines will be drawn after a nuclear war? And don't you wonder what the Russian people think about all this? I mean, even if Russia gets its way and annexes those cities in the Ukraine, the people of Russia are leaving in droves. Many are still trying to get away from the draft that Putin announced last week. I mean, I wonder, after seeing this speech of Putin and his threats in the world, what if they were just to remove Putin and Russia would become a nice, peaceful nation? Will that ever happen in our lifetime? Well, hopefully it won't take a nuclear weapon to try and figure that out. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ. We're talking about stories going on around the world. This week, there's an interesting story in the saga of the January 6th attack. So let's say you're a regular citizen there in the U.S., not a politician or a media personality, and you decide to yourself that Trump really won the election, that he was cheated, even though Trump's legal team has lost nearly every court case that it has tried and said that we will fight this all the way to the Supreme Court. This is even though he did not win any of those court cases. And even if he did, he would still not be able to make up the huge gap in votes against him. But even Trump said that if we lose, we will appeal all the way to the Supreme Court, which is where Trump has placed several judges he hopes will be loyal to him. You see, several decades ago, the Supreme Court did actually decide a presidential election between George Bush and Al Gore, which led to Bush winning. That was the closest election in history. Some surmise the election was decided by 6 votes in the state of Florida. But this is not that. This is an election where there's a clear winner by millions and millions of votes. But the idea is to get it all the way to the Supreme Court and then get the election thrown into Congress, where Trump thought that they will just give him the presidency. But that's what's interesting about this, is that one of the people trying to figure out a way to keep Trump in the White House is the wife of one of the Supreme Court justices, Clarence Thomas. Now, he is the only judge to vote against the January 6th committee being able to see Trump's documents leading to the insurrection plot. And he is married to one of the witnesses, Ginny Thomas, that testified in front of Congress this week on her role in that plot to overthrow the government. She's the one that wrote a text to the Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, that Trump should not concede the election and just keep moving ahead in the courts. She wrote, "Help this great president stand firm. Biden and his left are attempting the greatest heist in our history. Do not concede. Make a plan. Release the Kraken and save us from the left taking America down." She played up conspiracy theories that Joe Biden and his family are criminals, that he and the ballot fraud conspirators are currently being arrested and detained for ballot fraud and will soon be living in barges off of Gitmo. She wrote that they will all face military tribunals for sedition, which ironically is what's happening currently to all the people that stormed the Capitol on January 6th. Now, in case you don't know, Gitmo is a holding prison set up off the coast of Cuba as a place to bring terrorists from other countries. It was set up so in holding them, they would not have to adhere to U.S. laws for prisoners. You know, they couldn't post bail and demand a speedy trial. They can be tortured there. Anyway, U.S. citizens are not sent to Gitmo because, okay, obvious reasons. And I don't understand why they would be held in a barge off the coast of Gitmo. The purpose of sending prisoners to Gitmo is that there is a prison there. Why would you need a barge? But Ginny Thomas didn't stop there. She contacted lawmakers in Arizona in a scheme to switch real electors with fake ones. She did similar in Wisconsin. She seemed to follow many of the QAnon conspiracy theories about watermarked ballots and a sting operation utilized by the military to catch Democratic voter fraud. Now, Mark Meadows, Trump's chief of staff, wrote back to Thomas, "Evil ways always look like the victor until the King of Kings triumphs." No one's really sure if the King of Kings is supposed to be Jesus or Trump. We all know that Trump has compared himself to Jesus before, so maybe. But Mark Meadows, lawyer, said there's nothing illegal about this text. Just sounds really bad. But illegal or not, it does show the incredible involvement of Ginny Thomas, whose husband could possibly have been the one to decide the future of the presidential seat in the U.S. In her testimony this week, she said that she never discussed her work to overthrow the election with her husband. This, of course, is the key element. But we never got to find out if she had influence over her husband, because when Trump's lawyers brought it to the Supreme Court, they would not even accept the case because it was ridiculous. But what if they had? Would Jenny Thomas have pressured her husband in the same way she did the chief of staff, the lawmakers in Wisconsin or Arkansas? And did she have a hand in planning the insurrection on the Capitol? She was there on January 6th. However, she left, like Trump, when the fighting started. Things that make you go, I find it interesting that people that have been fighting for Trump to continue to be the president. I mean, besides the strange wife of Clarence Thomas, this week, Mike Lindell, the MyPillow guy, was stopped at a Hardee's drive-thru and his phone was seized by the FBI. Hardee's is like the McDonald's of the South in the U.S., in case you want to know. Now, Mike Lindell is that crazy guy. Comes on Fox and spreads crazy conspiracy theories about the election. He said on TV this week that the FBI took his phone and that he needed to send lots of money around, and now he can't. Now people are asking, okay, Mike, who are you sending lots of money to anyway? He's being sued for false statements against the makers of the voting machines in the U.S. Also, Rudy Giuliani, who is also getting sued, came on TV this week saying that congressional committees are lying about January 6th and that they are trying to say that making alternative electors is a crime. It kind of is a crime, isn't it? And then there's new footage of Roger Stone that came out this week. He's Trump's closest friend who was sentenced to prison, and Trump pardoned him at the last minute. In the footage, you see Stone saying that if Trump were to lose the election, they have a plan to keep him in the White House, yada, 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 keeps going on and on. I mean, Trump is rich and he can get intelligent people around him, but instead he chooses to have these strange, weird people always on TV saying and doing weird, strange things, sometimes stupid things. These are the people representing him to the world. I don't know, just boggles the mind. This is Eric Lecain here on The Jam on DZRJ. Turning over to some money news. Don't look. That's the advice many stockbrokers are giving out these days. Just don't look. It's not worth it. It only makes you upset. Stocks around the world had one of the worst weeks since 2008. Ugh. Remember 2008? I remember it well. I remember walking into BPI and saying, "Are you guys seeing what's going on?" Yep, in 2008, the money markets in the Philippines took a huge dive, but it was nothing compared to what happened around the world. It was this week in 2008, 14 years ago, this week, where the stocks fell off a cliff, a long, straight down cliff. Now, this week it started to seem like history was repeating itself, but so far, it's just bad. It's not yet the, oh my God, I'm going to commit suicide level yet. And if you remember back in 2008, the market eventually did recover. But last week, there were a lot of people comparing the two. Just like then, as now, most of the really smart people are saying, don't panic, even though the world market is at its lowest level since the pandemic. At the beginning of July, things looked pretty okay after a few rocky months. Then boom, fear of inflation, rate hikes. Oh, those rate hikes. That's what put us on the road to this 60 pesos per dollar. Also, as far as growth right now, China, for the first time in 30 years, has fallen behind in the rest of Asia. The COVID policies, the housing market collapse. China is suffering economically more than ever. China's GDP is going to be 2.3% for 2022, while the rest of Asia is looking at a 5.3%, which is more than double what it was in 2021. A lot of that has to do with the post-pandemic rebound in domestic consumption. Yes, people are coming back to the malls. But with China's zero COVID policies still in place, it has been a major disruption to its industry, as well as domestic sales and exports. Houses in China have fallen at 1.3% per year, and nearly 1/3 of all those properties are now classified as bad debt. But as all of this unfolds, the China's party's Congress will commence and pick new leaders for positions. However, the head of the country, President Xi, will be appointed as leader again for a third term in office. We're pretty sure, which means the hardline policies of keeping hundreds of people under lockdown will continue. The Philippines, of course, is on track with their growth for this year, although it's a little less than I had said a few months ago. Will be somewhere around 6.5%. That sounds all well and good after its massive drops during the pandemic. But the problem is the Philippines can't control the rest of the world. And the rest of the world is in shambles right now. With interest rates up and the peso continuing to drop, I'm not sure how the Philippines can handle what's coming. Inflation numbers are just continuing to grow and grow. Food is going up. There's no stopping that. Now, reports are that gas prices are going to settle, which will offset some of that. But still remember that story that I did last week, the 60 to the dollar story. When is that going to stop? Now, the Philippine president just finished his trip to New York, which, what I hear, was a success. And he also said he's looking to ramp up tourism in the country. Now, in 2021, the country had 163,879 visitors, while in 2022, almost 1.5 million. So we can see the tourism of the Philippines is coming back in some way. And of course, Christmas is coming. And with the dollar to peso level at an all-time high, that close to 60, many Filipinos are going to have a lot of extra cash come this December. But still, we got to look at the world as a whole. And that look currently is not very good. Many experts are saying this could be the way it is for the next 10 years. I mean, U.S. economists are trying to slow down the growth of the country. Consumer services are doing great. Hotels, passenger transportation, going to hair salons, they're all doing well. Restaurants are recovering and adding jobs. But this can't continue to grow forever. Eventually, we will get to where we were, pre-pandemic spending. Job growth will level out. Consumer spending will slow, and we are going back to the fears of a recession. Remember last week we talked about the interest rate hikes? Well, that's going to continue as they try and curb this crazy inflation. However, that is in turn going to causing this bloodbath that we're currently taking in the stock market. And this is wreaking havoc with currencies around the world. And as inflation begins to rise and rise, this is eventually going to touch the common man, that welder, cashier in the supermarket, eventually spending less and less of their money. Yes, it's true that the internal wealth of the upper class will weaken, but it's really on whether, that father buys his kid a pair of shoes this quarter. That's what's going to make a difference. I mean, here we are going in the final quarter of 2022, and we are just expecting that things would be better, yet they just are not. Yes, much of the world does rely on what the U.S. banks do and what the GDP will be in the U.S. and how they will react to inflation. We can't help that a war has happened. We can't help that the Fed waited 11 months to raise the interest rates. But this is where we are now. We are still so unclear as to how this war is going to change, or how Europe is going to be during the cold months. What will the prices of heating fuel be? Will there be a shortage? Will the Dow continue to drop? It's down 11.5 on the year. It's the perfect storm, I guess you might say. On the other hand, experts are saying the U.S. economy is primed for a bounce back or one or the other. Could we be looking at another 2008? And the answer is nobody really knows. I guess if we did, then we wouldn't be in the predicament that we're in right now. And this is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ, RJTV, talking about stories going on around the world. Thank you so much for joining us in our sports segment this week. I want to talk about chess. First of all, is chess a sport? The answer really depends on what country you're in. But in Southeast Asia, it is a sport, just like billiards and lawn bowling. But chess, unlike lawn bowling and billiards, does not require any physical movement. except to pick up a piece and move it to a square. And these days, with technology, you don't even need to do that. Sometimes major matches are even played online. Now, many of us have become fascinated with chess in recent years, especially with that movie, The Queen's Gambit, about a young girl who shocked the world by beating everyone. But that story comes from decades ago. These days, chess has changed so very much. Like I said, you don't need to physically move in order to play chess. That means that a machine could play just like a human. In 1996, what some people considered the greatest player ever, Garry Kasparov, played off against Deep Blue, a supercomputer made by IBM. The first time they played, Kasparov won the whole match. However, the computer did win 2 games, which surprised everybody. A year later, the rematch, the computer won the whole thing. Kasparov said afterwards that the computer never really gets tired. It's the same at the beginning as it is at the end of the match. This I can't compete with. Now, since then, computers have gotten significantly better at the game. In fact, they have shaped the sport into the incredible game that it is today. But the thing is, at this point in the evolution of the game, as opposed to 1996, computers are far better than any human player. The current greatest human chess player on the planet, Magnus Carlsen, the 5-time world chess champion, cannot beat Stockfish, the most advanced chess engine ever built. Statistically, Carlsen has only a 2% chance of even having a draw with that computer. But with this new development and the fact that chess is many times now played online, the element of cheating has worked its way into the game. Why? Money. Many of these games pay a lot of money. And so what's to stop people from cheating with the computer, making their moves for them? Now, there have been problems with cheating at in-person games as well. However, many tournaments now have metal detectors and signal scanners and nonlinear scanners and thermal energy imaging systems to catch the cheaters. But this week, the chess world was shocked when Magnus Carlsen, that 5-time world champion, was beaten by a 19-year-old American who should not have won. After the loss, and thus ending his 53-game winning streak, Carlsen posted that the 19-year-old Hans Niemann was cheating at the tournament. Then, at another tournament, when the two met again in a game of drama, Carlsen made one move and then walked away from the board in protest. Now, the young American said that he is not cheating, and even though he admitted to cheating when he was 12 and when he was 16, now that he's 19, he does not cheat anymore. Carlsen said in a statement that he released that, "I believe that cheating in chess is a big deal and an existential threat to the game. I also believe that chess organizers and all those who care about the sanctity of the game we love should seriously consider increasing security measures and the methods of cheat detection for over-the-board chess. I believe that Niemann has cheated more and more recently, and that he has publicly admitted that." End of quote. Now, you may ask, what proof does Carlsen have that this 19-year-old cheated on him? Well, Carlsen says that while he was playing him, he was not really concentrating, nor was he tense. However, he was doing things on the board that very few on earth can do against Carlsen. So here you have probably the greatest player on the planet being beat by a young guy who's really not at that level yet, and who has already been caught cheating before. Now, the young guy has denied that he was cheating and said that he would play naked if he was asked to. He also said he would play in a closed box, which does not allow for any electronic transmissions to come in. He says, "I am a clean player." Kind of sounded like he's not taking stories, right? But it does seem odd that such a young, inexperienced player could beat a grand champion. I would say that maybe he was just good on that day. However, he has admitted to cheating in the past. So when he plays, does something out of the ordinary, it does make people suspicious. But there have been issues of cheating in chess long before technology of inner earpieces and small planted devices giving you clues as to what move to make next. In 1978, the World Chess Championships, one Russian was playing an exiled Russian, and he said he was being cheated by the guy who was trying to blind him by wearing sun-reflecting sunglasses. Later, one was served a blueberry yogurt, which supposedly contained coded communications from his analyst in the blueberries of the yogurt. In 2015, a chess player kept going to the bathroom, and it turned out he was checking his phone to find out the best moves to make. Another incident involved a camera using Morse code to send signals. There was a video camera inside a pendant around his neck, then wires attached to his body, and a small box under his armpit to receive the signal. They caught him because during the entire game, he never moved. He had his arms folded the whole time and his thumb under his armpit getting the signals. But these days, honestly, getting caught cheating would be devastating for a player. Most players say it's not worth it because you can get banned for life from tournaments, and no one would want to play you, and no sponsor would ever touch you again. So the young American denies he cheated in any way during the tournament. And if he did cheat, how did he do it? The people analyzing the game say the young guy played perfectly, which is a big red flag because most humans, even the best ones, make mistakes. And there are always ways that a computer will analyze the game versus the way a human can. So the speculation will continue to swirl around the chess world. Is it possible that a young kid won a game that is impossible that he should have won? So is chess doomed to be a cheating sport? Will doctors need to do a full body search with x-rays before each chess game begins? Or should all players be required to play naked? This could get ugly. And this is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJ TV. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We will be back again next week, so please join us then. And for then, from all the people here at the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJ TV, everybody be safe out there, and we will see you next week.